If you are experiencing a dark night of the soul and you're wondering, when will I see the light of day? This video is for you. I made a video about how to understand the dark night of the soul. Feel free to check it out. In this video, I want to share, how do you survive a dark night of the soul? I created this 3S model in hopes that it helps you. And if you haven't watched my first video on understanding the dark night of the soul, I share that I went through my own dark night at the age of 28. And it was quite a transformational period in my life, but it also was extremely uncomfortable, disorienting. It was lonely, and I wish I had known more about the dark night, especially when I first embarked on the journey. So before we dive into the 3S model, I want to ground us in what exactly is this dark night. And I'm going to share a couple of different definitions from various spiritual teachers that I think will help us better understand what the dark night is. So Thomas More, in his book, Dark Nights of the Soul, love this book, highly recommend it, talks about how the dark night is this liminal period where you're neither there or here. What in the world does that mean? It means you're in between. The life that you were living, who you thought you were, no longer makes sense. And it's almost like this old life is just crumbling before you, but you haven't yet established the foundation or your identity for your new life. And so it's like you're in the dark, you're in a forest, your flashlight doesn't work, GPS doesn't work, maybe you've run out of snacks, there's all these different paths, and you're wondering, how am I going to survive? So, it's important to know that you're not alone at all. Right? It's like life is upside down, you're questioning the meaning, you feel very lost. So I'm also going to share Eckhart Tolle's definition of a dark night, and this is what he says. He went through his own dark night, by the way. It's a kind of rebirth. Tolle says the dark night of the soul is a kind of death that you die. What dies is the egoic sense of self. And I think it's important too to know, for some people, I think that Eckhart Tolle definitely fits into this category, as well as many well-known spiritual teachers, that the dark night can be this form of spiritual initiation, where you have to go through this process as part of an awakening. So finally, third, I'm going to share a definition from Tom Cronin. He is a meditation teacher based in Australia, and I really like what he says on his website about the dark night. It's a lonely, dark, hollow feeling, a feeling of being lost and empty. It's a time where you question everything and have no idea who you are. But what I appreciate is Tom Cronin also goes on to say, through the dark night, you're leveling up. You may leave one floor only to find yourself on another floor where there's more expansive views that are brighter and more appealing. And I definitely found that to be true for myself, because during the dark night, I felt very called to leave a job that I had outgrown. I felt called to leave the Midwest, move to Seattle because I wanted to connect to nature. It was like my soul was calling me to live more expansively and to really address fear that was keeping me small, living a life that really no longer fit. So, how do you survive this dark night? We want to start with surrender. And I want to speak from personal experience. I tried to brute force my way through the dark night. I will be perfectly honest with you. I rebelled. I was kicking and screaming because my dark night started with chronic illness. I went from someone in a constant state of frenetic activity. I was working full time. I was in graduate school. I was training for long distance races. I never took time for 28 years, I would say, to rest, to connect with my body, to really ask myself, what am I racing towards? Why am I looking to the external world for validation? And so I was so incredibly exhausted. And the more I tried to push and continue to try to train and be in constant motion, the more I found the universe was like, no, it's time to rest, it's time to reflect. And it was very uncomfortable because I attached a lot of my identity to being a runner, to being a high performer, to being a producer. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. However, the dark night is really a time where you have to let go of everything that you used to identify with. And so I'm going to share an interesting example from the dark nights of the soul that really highlights the importance of the surrender piece. So Thomas More says this. The most difficult task of all is to give yourself what you need on the deepest level. Care rather than cure. Organize your life to support the process. You are incubating your soul, not living a heroic adventure. Arrange your life accordingly. Tone it down. Get what comforts you can, but don't move against the process. So the visual that I have is, you're paddling upstream, you're going against the current. It's like it's so much energy, like it's arduous. You're like, oh, can I have more ease? And then once you surrender, you're going with the flow of life. You're allowing the universe to unfold as it should. And the question that you need to ask yourself, what am I resisting? And for me, I was resisting dealing with my stuff, really looking at myself and asking myself, who am I? Is this a life that I'm meant to lead? And there's two things that can prevent surrender: distraction. It could be in the form of work, just a lot of frenetic activity, as I shared. It could be in the form of constantly being on your phone. Your mind is like this ping pong ball. Or you could also be numbing out with drugs and alcohol and food. So if you are in the dark night, I really pay attention to what you're doing to try to avoid, again, really tapping into your intuition and really honoring the call of your soul. So moving on to the second S, silence. How often do we spend sitting in silence? Maybe not even 5 minutes a day. And so I would consider, how can you incorporate more time with yourself during a dark night of the soul? That could take the form of meditation. You may sign up for a meditation retreat. It could take the form of doing the morning pages, which is part of The Artist's Way. Author is Julia Cameron. It could simply mean spending time in nature without your phone. Imagine that. You're not listening to a podcast or music, or you're not doing a walk and talk with a friend. Nothing wrong with any of that. But there is something to be said about connecting to nature and really being in tune with the expansiveness of the universe. And so during the dark night, I lived in Seattle, and I would walk down to Lake Washington. I lived close by, and I remember just spending so much time just looking out at the water. And it was so healing and nourishing because, as I had mentioned, for 28 years, I was just motoring through life. And there was something so refreshing about just taking in the beauty of Seattle, especially water, which can be very cleansing. So finally, third, I recommend support. It's really important that you find a therapist, a spiritual teacher, a coach who has experienced a dark night, who can hold space for you, someone who does not criticize you, someone who does not judge you, someone who does not tell you, you need to just get over whatever you're going through. Be happy, right? What's wrong with you? Get out there, be social. Why are you alone? You need someone who understands what it's like to be in the darkness. And I'm going to share a passage from one of my favorite books by Eckhart, Tolle, Stillness Speaks. And he talks about what it means to be a spiritual teacher and work with one. So he says this: a true spiritual teacher does not have anything to teach in the conventional sense of the word, does not have anything to give or add to you, such as new information, beliefs, or rules of conduct. The only function of such a teacher is to help you remove that which separates you from the truth of who you already are and what you already know in the depth of your being. The spiritual teacher is there to uncover and reveal to you the dimension of inner depth that is also peace. And so during my dark night, I was extremely lucky to work with a life and career coach who had depth. She had been through her own dark night. And she reminded me the importance of really connecting to parts of myself that I had disowned, to really dealing with painful stuff from my past, to really understanding patterns that were no longer serving me. And the coach I work with really helped me understand myself. And she would call out, ways when I wasn't being authentic to who I truly am in a very loving and compassionate way. So I want to end this video with a quote from pioneering psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I think it's a very powerful quote. And she said this: the most beautiful people are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of those depths. So if you are going through a dark night of the soul, know that you're not alone. There are many people who have walked this dark path before you, and know and trust that this dark night will likely be quite transformative for you, and you will make your way out of the darkness and you will see the light.